In the last reading, we saw how teachers had starkly different perceptions of honors versus regular students and planned their courses to conform to those expectations. Now we turn to learning about girls, specifically working class chicanas experiencing their adolescence in high school. Julie Betty's research focuses on girl culture. Her piece touches on themes that had been visited or discussed in previous readings. The assigned reading opens with Betty trying or asking teachers for help to meet non-prep girls. The teachers revealed their attitudes towards those girls through nonverbal cues like laughter and head shaking. One of the teachers even joked, "They'll all be barefoot and pregnant." Teachers acknowledged that these girls, the chicas, didn't have high aspirations and were troublesome, offering stories about different students to demonstrate their point. In this piece, we see the power of perceptions, the role of curriculum, how students respond to the culture of the classrooms, and how their own choices play a role in their life trajectories. Betty's work takes place in a high school in California. In the school where Betty is conducting her research, she focuses on two dominant groups, the preps and then the non-preps. Betty writes that expressions of sexuality and by extension motherhood operated as a sign of adult status and served to reject teachers' and parents' methods of keeping the girls childlike. The non-prep girls had either chosen or been tracked into the non-prep courses. The non-prep track was in the backdrop of the Chicas schooling experience. Teachers saw hypersexualized girls who caused trouble and or didn't care about school. But Betty, through getting to know these girls, discovers that their girl culture is far more complicated than that. The prep girls' expression of femininity was the norm at school. Prep girls wore their hair straight with a little flip or curl at the bottom. Their clothes neither clung nor sagged on their bodies. They wore light colors, pastels. All other feminine performances were seen as deviating from this norm. The prep girls wore makeup, but their makeup was natural, and the chicas' performance of girl culture was in contrast to the prep culture. Chicas wore darker colors and tighter clothes. Each group was aware of the style of the other group. Each of the groups performed class and race-specific versions of gender, but the chicas' performances were often reduced to gender and sexuality and affirmed stereotypes that the girls didn't value education, but valued romance and families. The reality Betty found was, again, more complicated. The girls weren't as interested in guys as the romance culture or the teacher's perceptions would lead one to believe. In fact, some of the most seemingly performatively sexualized girls were the least interested in heterosexual relationships, marriage, or children. Betty said that a dominant theme among this girl culture was that guys were dogs. The primping, the getting ready to go out, the rituals associated with going out were more about female bonding than they were about boys and or pursuing relationships. Sexual activity, Betty also found was something that most girls across social classes and racial and ethnic groups was a part of, or found that most girls were sexually active, regardless of social class and or racial and ethnic group status. Prep girls were sexually active, but were secretive and used birth control and were more likely to have abortions should they become pregnant. Stories of abortions were non-existent among the chicas, and they were less likely to use birth control regularly. The most common explanation about pregnancies among the chicas was that they just happened. For chicas, becoming pregnant and having babies was a marker for adult status. Prep girls avoided pregnancy because they intended to go to college. The pregnancies and the babies became part of the girl culture for the chicas. The non-school talk inside the classrooms turned to baby clothing and due dates. These were things that mattered. Betty also notes that these conversations were ways that the chicas demonstrated their boredom with vocational schooling and their perception that it was irrelevant. Betty says that the girls also knew that boys were not reliable and could not be counted on for either economic support or for parental support. It isn't that they didn't think that the chicas didn't think that college wasn't necessary. They just saw college as something to do while you were adulting. Teachers didn't see the chicas girl culture as problematic until it resulted in pregnancy. Educators and administrators found pregnancy problematic to adulty, and they made that and their opinions known to the girls. The school made all students attend award ceremonies that recognized the students' academic successes and those that follow the institution's ideals. Betty notes that the Mexican girls of all the social categories were most likely to keep their babies. People across all social categories, including school personnel, wrongly interpreted this as a difference in sexualized behaviors and morals. She goes on to say that they failed to recognize that teen pregnancy was something that was actually correlated with race and class. The vocational curriculum was perceived as uninspiring, busy work. Students in the vocational track attended a field trip once a year to a for-profit business school. They didn't go to a community college. They didn't go to a four-year university. They went to one of those for-profit business schools. There, students were talked to about their plans beyond college. The recruiters preyed upon the stereotypical tropes about family and criminality. Recruiters also touted the benefits of the business school and the 2-year certificate, while at the same time pitching the school as a kind of exclusive space where not just anyone can come. The reality is that these schools are not accredited institutions of higher education. They are extremely expensive, and they tend to place people in lower income, non-upwardly mobile occupations. Moreover, the credits and certificates earned there are often not transferable to other institutions. The fact that the high school didn't warn the students about the limitations of such private business schools, and the fact that the high school let these students have a field trip is a sort of school sanctioned activity. The educators' perceptions and attitudes towards their students was revealed in the decision-making process here toward those vocational students. So some of the girls in the Chicas felt that they were tracked into the vocational curriculum. Some chose the vocational track so they could work in the attendance office. Some didn't realize that there was a vocational track. And now that it was their senior year or their junior year, it was too late to make changes. Because the vocational curriculum was seen as busy work, they often skipped class. Some had anxiety about their futures. They recognized there were structural issues, but they didn't see those things playing out in their own individual lives. Moreover, some of the girls' parents worked at a cannery, at the factory, or in the fields. So the piece states that for some of the chicas, making it to their junior year in high school and having a clean indoor job, as opposed to the types of jobs that their parents had, even if those jobs were low income retail, could be seen as improvements. Betty writes that the girls vacillated between understanding their dilemma and the precariousness of their future, and denying it and distracting themselves with their girl culture. What's also interesting to note was that the chicas, essentialized the differences that they observed too. Middle-class versions of whiteness were performed by the preps, but these prep girl performances were coded simply as white, though there were other white groups there at the high school, like the smokers and the kickers. They didn't see those groups as working class whites, as they didn't see them as not having privilege. The chicas wondered what was wrong with those smokers and kickers. They saw them as white people and having opportunity. Betty says that because they, or we as a society, don't have a language or a schema for class in the United States the way that we do have one for race, class-based performances get tied to race. So whiteness is actually a symbol of being middle class or high class, whereas brownness gets associated with being poor or working class. Mexican girls had all sorts of cues that they had to navigate for themselves: color, Spanish fluency, immigration status, right? All of those things they wrestled with, and were associated with like reflections about authenticity. Right, so they homogenized the white people, even though there's differentiations among the white girls or white people too at the school. So students bring with them to the schools a gendered, a ethnic, and a class-based culture, and enter into the schools, which is a social organization, right? They enter into the schools that silo the students into one of two tracks: the college track or the vocational track. You can kind of think about the college track or the vocational track as like the equivalent of the honors versus the regular track in the middle school that, you know, we had read about in the previous reading. The vocational track is seen as having uninspiring, irrelevant curriculum, which is avoided or rejected by engaging in gendered, race, and class-based performances. The school adults see the chicas' behavior as problematic and not valuing schooling, which then problematizes the students who don't conform to the student ideals. So again, the kids are seeing the vocational track as basically an awful, not worth being engaged track. They behave accordingly. And then the teachers are seeing, and the educators are seeing the students and the way they're behaving and going, oh, they don't value school and they don't value education. Bettie demonstrates that the schools essentialize the difference between the preps and the chicas, reducing the chicas' lack of engagement as a reflection of their cultural background, which is seen as deviant, while the prep culture is normed. Bettie also demonstrates that the students don't have the cultural scripts that are class-based, so that even the chicas that see the differences as race, even the chicas that see the differences as class-based, don't have a language to discuss that. In the end, these students are not just puppets being strung along the education system, right? I think that this is something that's important for us to recognize. So, right, we saw in the previous reading how the teachers were making choices within which, like, the students had to exist. And what we see in this piece is how the students, specifically the chicas, are making choices and behaving within the structures that they find themselves in. And so, you know, they're not simply being strung along. They have efficacy, right? And they make choices for themselves, but the choices that they make also actively lead them to be disengaged with the curriculum and then enact behaviors that lead them to exiting school and into a working class location once they finish high school. Right, so here's that kind of combination of structure and agency, right? But again, that structure is creating these parameters within which the females are operating. But I think what's also important is that, you know, Worthy's work reminds us that the tracking that we see in high school is actually preceded by the tracking that happens in middle school. And in these spaces, what we're also seeing is this kind of racialized and class-based like grouping that's happening. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. This is a really great piece. I hope you take time to read it all. But again, I want you to be thinking about how structure influences behavior, and then how that has an impact on where people wind up when they're adults.